Welcome. So we are back with the Trust Your Gut podcast. I'm Erin Trent Johnson, Black Mama Body, and I am here with Dr. Antonio Aragona, Ayurvedic doctor, a doctor of Ayurveda, Ayurvedic medicine, and I am excited to engage in our monthly conversation. We are picking back up on the series of Ayurveda's definition of health and how we are moving through big seasonal change. So I am going to um, acknowledge that we are in the midst of a time of um, big change, big shift. We are in the midst of seasonal shift here in the Northern Hemisphere in the US. And I'm here, we are both here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So in the Northeast, we are in the midst of the month of transition before we get to the darkness of the winter solstice. So in November, we are witnessing many changes with the leaves changing color and falling. We actually are in the midst of probably the longest time without rain that I can remember in my adult life. We had rain last night for the first time, I think, like real rain for the first time in maybe it's like 45 days or something like that.
Hmm.
Maybe and so we also have had very warm weather. We really haven't had a fall. We're transitioning now in November and just starting to feel some cool air.
Hmm.
So our bodies are in this change and transformation. And Dr. A, we're going to talk about it today.
Yeah.
We're going to get into it. So, as usual, Dr. A is bringing the wisdom of Ayurvedic medicine as a practitioner and tapping into the lineage of wisdom that we can read and hear through Sanskrit. And so I'm going to actually pass it off to Dr. A to get us started, to bring us in.
Hi, good morning, Erin, and good morning, everyone that's listening and participating in this great experience and journey of exploring consciousness, health, and well-being, and the interrelationship of all the above as is within. So, um, as I always like to start with some shlokas from the original texts of Ayurveda, and as my Sanskrit is slowly, you know, being practiced and learned, and it's a very long process. Bear with me when it's not perfect, but um, so there's a particular chapter in the first and primary text of Ayurvedic medicine, which is called Charaka Samhita, and it's in this one particular chapter in Vimanastan, which is like this chapter, and it's called Jana Padadam Shaniya, which is like the chapter on epidemics, pandemics, etc. And often throughout the classic texts, especially in Charaka, um, there's usually like a student who's asking a particular question of this, awakened rishi or high embodied being of scientific knowledge and wisdom of the universal consciousness. And so in this Charaka Samhita, it's usually between Agni Vesha and Lord Atreya. And so Agni Vesha asks questions to Lord Atreya, and Atreya is always just explaining certain things. And this is sort of how like the texts and knowledge that are dripping with countless, details keep getting, expressed and explained and revealed. And so, Agnivesha asks a question about, um, how does the simultaneous destruction of communities take place by the incidence of one single disease in spite of individuals who differ from one another in their constitution, diet, physique, vitality, habits, psychic makeup, and age, etc. And so in the Sanskrit, basically, evam vadhinam bhagavad matreya magniveshacha uvacha udritani kalu bhagavan vaisajanyai samyaghi vihatani samyagyava charitani. And then it goes into cha apitu kalu janapadodon chane janapado dvanshana makenaiva vyadhina yuga padasmana prakritaya hara deha bala satmya sattva asya sam manusyanam kasmad vatiti. And so that's basically the question. So this is like the energy that's coming through. And so then Atreya explains, he goes on to say, Tamu vacha bhagavan treyaha eva masa manya vata mapya bir agni vesha praktya bir bhava ar manusya manya mane nye bhavaha samanyasta davagunyat samanya kalaham samanya lingascha vyadhyayo vinirvatmana majadva janapadvam mudhavam sanyanti tetu kalvime bhavaha samanya janapadeshu bhavanti tadyatha vayu udakam desha kala iti. And so basically Atreya replies, Agnivesha, though a community may be dissimilar with respect to the constitution and other characteristics of its individuals, there are other common factors which often adversely affected, resulting in a simultaneous outbreak of diseases having similar symptoms that destroy communities. The common factors which affect mass population are air, so vayu, jala, water, desha, land, and kala, season. And so then he goes on to saying, you know, I'll pause there just to kind of explain what's happening is the understanding of like, okay, why are humans getting diseases and what's going on, especially when there are these big catastrophic conditions that might strike people down. And, Lord Atreya is saying, well, besides just the regular things of your constitution and age and things like that, he's like, things that affect people are the characteristics of the air, of the water, of the land, and of the season. So he goes on to explain like, how do you know when air is polluted, when water is polluted, when the land is polluted, and kala, so time and season. So it's like ritu, and for the time and season, it's understanding like what happens through normal time and space as we go from, you know, childhood to adulthood to seniorhood as time, so parinam, and then also the time of the year, the time of the day, sort of like concentric circles overlapping over time, revolving through space. And it's this combination of characteristics that are when there's pollution of these elements, that these are the things that will affect their overall state of health and well-being, and sort of inhibit the capacity to like really be alive and in a sense of like I'm alive and this is great and I can keep moving forward. So then, this is a little bit of longer of a shloka, so I won't read all of it, but you know, other factors causes for like the Jana Padodvan Chania, which is like epidemic pandemics, is, you know, um, and it's very interesting because when he writes this, it's thousands and thousands of years ago, and it's relevant to the time. So they it's almost like there were issues going on back then with concerns of water contamination and pollutants of the soil and the air quality. So imagine thousands of years ago they're already talking about epidemics, pandemics, and then this chapter seems like it's also describing today. And I remember reading this chapter when COVID had started, and it was very interesting to sort of reflect on this. And so the other factor that he talks about, let's see if I can find it for a second. It is so he says, so it continues to ask the question. He's like, tell us, Lord, what makes the air, etc., vitiated, which tends to destroy whole people. And so Lord Atreus says, the root cause of vitiation of these factors is adharma, unrighteousness. Sins of the present life or in the misdeeds of the past life also are the root of vitiation of all these factors, and the source of this is intellectual error, which is prajnaparada, which we've talked about in other episodes. Thus, when the reigning heads of countries, cities, trade guilds, etc., govern the people irresponsibly by transgressing the virtuous path, then their officers, subordinates, and other subordinates, people of the city and community, and traders deviate from their duties as well and propagate such unrighteous acts further. Their sinful acts perforce causes the righteous acts to disappear. Because of the disappearance of righteous acts, even the gods desert the people living in such places. This causes seasons to get impaired in those places. There is no rain in time or never at all, or abnormal rain occurs. The air does not blow properly. The land is afflicted. The water reservoirs dry up, and herbs lose their true properties and suffer deterioration. As a consequence, the people perish as a result of infectious contact or ingestion or of polluted food and water, etc., occurs. And just to kind of say, like, okay, we're not left in this bleak place, you know, Ayurveda is like, yes, we understand these things, and some of these things are out of our control, some of these things are within our capacity to do some things and change. And so it will give some suggestions, and here it's understanding how to work with the land and the air and the water. And it's, they go on and saying, that it's easier to correct the vitiations of air and water and land overall than like, time and the bigger pieces that will affect these kind of, situations. And, it's understanding also they suggest that honoring the seasons, honoring the elements, honoring the times of season in a person's life, in its transition through childhood to adolescence to adulthood, etc. Like honoring these pieces in appropriate ways, honoring the seasons themselves by wearing the right clothes, but also doing seasonal purging is going to be utmost important, that as these kind of contamination issues occur and increase over time and space, we're going to need more and more and more of these capacities to like reduce the effect that the bulk of these things accumulate in our physiology. So we might not be able to change the forward trajectory of like technology and the introduction of newer things like nanotechnology and chips and all these things and 5G, and I'll probably have 10G, and then there's no changing that, unfortunately. But there are things that we could do to still try to like reduce the momentum of the things that are accumulating, and proper seasonal cleansing must be done. Like they're emphasizing it over and over, like it must be done. Basic pacifying diet outside of a proper purge, proper protocol, proper detoxification kind of like protocol isn't going to do very much at all. These little simple home flushes of like gallbladder flush and kidney flush will not be appropriate for sure, because you have to treat the body as a system. Can't target a particular organ without expecting the other organs, if they're not functioning properly, to take the load of whatever's being moved around. And then you're displacing things, and then it's sort of like moving things from one landfill to another, but not remediating the pathway in between and the pre-existing situation, right? It's understanding the magnitude of what you're really doing in the whole place. Everyone wants a quick fix. It's like, oh, my liver enzymes are elevated, so I need to do a liver flush. Well, maybe it's not the liver that really needs to be flushed, but everything else that's sort of filtering into or inundating the liver, right? And we're thinking about, the political pieces, adding to like which countries and which cities support environmental conservationism and more like eco-friendly things and like solar panels and less like contaminants going into the water system, better, like all these things. We can take care of the home by do immediate like remediations, but if the city's not doing its job, there's something you could do to your microcosm, right? And your microcosm
Mm-hmm.
includes and consists of the body. It's like, what am I eating on a physical, mental, emotional level? What are the five senses exposed to? Previously we've talked about, three main causes of disease, which is, asap mendriyarta samyoga, which is like misuse of the indriyas, which are the senses. Looking at things that are inappropriate, listening to things that are inappropriate, eating foods that are inappropriate, smelling things that are inappropriate, touching things that are inappropriate. Um, Pranyabharada, which is like it's sometimes translated to crime of wisdom or misuse of wisdom. And
Mm,
and in this moment, just to kind of, honor like my first Ayurveda teacher who just recently passed a couple of days ago, when he talked about Prajnaparada, he's like, it's 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 a state of ignorance. It's like ignoring what's right and choosing, yeah, it's like ignoring what's right, knowing what's
mm,
right, but ignoring what's right. And that's the ignorance part. And then parinama, which is time. So these are causes of disease. Time is just a thing. It's, the seasons are doing their thing. It's on a clock, right? And then we're rotating. Um, the moon rotates around the sun and we revolve around, we're revolving around the sun and the moon rotates around the earth. And these rotations are sort of like, and sort of like sacred geometry, creating these like subtle fields. And,
mhm,
everything is prone to like breaking down. So we might speed things up with sort of catalytic things that are going to be, pollutants like increased carbon monoxide and PCBs in the atmosphere, which don't help, all these things, and understanding, wow, there's a lot of things to think about in one moment in time and to research and to keep an eye on, like who's doing what with what politics and what lobbyists are supporting for, water preservation, air filtration, and air, like land rehabilitation, et cetera. Like all these things matter because whatever's happening in your geography, we saw in the 1800s, people that live near coal mines were getting like upper respiratory issues and like having blackened lungs and dying from, carbon and, anything that you're exposed to, people that were living near landfills had a higher incidence of like neurological deficits, cancers, and other
mhm.
abnormalities. So we know there's a correct connection. And we also have to think about, well, we're not separate from the rest of the world, so whatever's happening there is going to affect us. We saw that here in Philly, in the East Coast, when Canada had its fire a couple of years ago. You know,
That's right.
and it's like when the Amazon was on fire, I think yeah, it was at the beginning of COVID, like everyone's like, oh, well, that's happening over in South America. Yeah, that magnitude of smoke and how it was introduced to the air and the air pathways of the planet that circulate the different, streams of currents. Like, of course we're gonna have that.
I want to pause you for a second because, you know, there's so much here that I wanted to connect with. Um, there's the what feels hot. I don't want to say hot like popular. I want to
Mhm,
say hot like intense presence in our social and cultural life of the recent election in the United States. And as we're speaking about this, the dharma, right, um, of poor leadership. And this is globally, so I want to name that, but I want to put a placeholder in that. I'm going to come back to it and put a pin in it. I'm just going to name it and come back to it. But the piece here about we are not separate,
mhm,
and that our bodies are system like right our bodies are systems, our whole systems are
mhm,
interconnected systems, um, and then our bodies as these interconnected systems are relating to the interconnected systems of the earth. And so the impact of of fire, right, in Canada has impact on our body. I mean, I can speak to my personal experience, and you know this well. Following that smoke, I experienced upper respiratory issues all of the fall, including like not being able to hear
mhm,
for a period in my left ear from September to almost December.
mhm,
Um, and when I reflect on that, I know even last week, no, this was 2 weeks ago, there are forest fires right now burning in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where we're experiencing these fires in the Northeast, where usually fire season is a West Coast experience that a lot of folks, I think, on the Northeast are, or throughout the rest of the country, are very disconnected
Mm-hmm.
from the trauma that people in the West Coast or on the West Coast experience every year when fire season comes. There is now fire season
Mm-hmm.
where there is such an intense threat of mass wildfires. And so this idea that like this isn't, that's not mine, like that's not my issue. I'm not going to feel it. Feels very uh, potent in our culture, and I think within the US, I think definitely coming out of this recent election, I think there was a lot of um, deep pain around so many people voting and saying, well, that's not my issue.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, that's that, right? Like I'm not the one getting deported. I'm not the one. That's not for me. He's not talking to
Mm-hmm.
me. But that extends, I think, um, into how our health is impacted every day. This idea that
Mm-hmm.
we are disconnected from each other, disconnected from the land, from earth, from the water, disconnected globally,
Mm-hmm.
cannot feel the human experience of bodies, right, in South America who live near the Amazon because it doesn't feel immediate. This, I think, is a really important thread to talk about as it relates to our action, like to our health. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a lot of bodies, to your point, who are saying, well, you know, I go to the doctor and I get the pill for this, and I go, and I'm taking care of, like you said, my liver. And so my body
Mm-hmm.
is this individual package that is not, and my health is not determined by the way that I relate to other bodies or the way that I relate to nature, to the earth, the way that I relate
Mm-hmm.
to time. So I just want to slow it down there because I know I said a lot of big concepts, but I'm wondering like what you're hearing, if there's a thread there. You know me, I'm going to put a whole lot out there and be like, you pull what you want. But I feel like there's something really important here about relationality and health that like is so deeply important, and that Ayurveda is like providing this very clear, like literal direct
Mm-hmm.
um
Yeah.
guidance.
Yeah. I mean, I think I also started this topic with blowing things up because within like 4 sentences it covers like every and so it's just like all right there, and
Yes.
they were able to compact such information in short spaces and small spaces, um, because they were that concise and clear. And then they also assumed that people had the proper intelligence to really just unpack it in their own mind, which comes on sometimes depending on the interpreter, the filter might not be clear and then misperceive, but that's a different story. Nonetheless, they assume that if you're seeing these couple lines and you're like, oh, it's only just a couple lines, and it's like, oh my God, you just talked about all the elements, the political climate, the personal climate, the global climate, the universal climate within just 4 sentences. And it talking about the relationality of things or the relativeness of each of us relating, it's like the word relationship is the capacity to relate, right? And it's not just about intimate partnerships and things like that. It's about how do we relate to one another? How do we relate to ourselves first and foremost? Because you can't have a healthy relationship with someone outside of you without having it within yourself. So any kind of self-deprecating, judgmental, criticizing, thoughts that you have of yourself is going to come out somewhere else sometimes. If you have a pretty good filter that you prevent that, that's good. That's a sign of intelligence. Another sign of intelligence, proper intelligence, is the capacity to hold two differing opinions simultaneously without
Hmm.
disruption. And Ayurveda doesn't take a political stance on things. It takes a universal stance on things and abides by truth. It doesn't get involved in politics. It's not liberal. It's not conservative. It's not democratic. It's not Republican. Just like when we first started our chat, podcast like a year ago, Ayurveda doesn't care if you're black or white or yellow or green or purple or any of the colors. It's people, it's human health care, right? And human sick care and human disease cure. It's like human, is implying everyone and it is an equal place and treated slightly differently, slightly differently because of geography, because then you have to take in local medicine, but not meant to be divisive, right?
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I've been, because I've had several patients come in and I ask everyone that I haven't seen since the election process, first question is like, how are you feeling from that? Because some people feeling great, some people are feeling horrible. So Ayurveda accounts for like where are you at in your state of mind, because I could have you on a protocol, but if you get stressed because something changed outside of you and you're perceiving some capacity of stress that causes anxiety, depression, now you're drinking so much and now you're getting your ulcers coming back. Well, of course, I'm going to want to know like what was the trigger, right? It's not just, oh, I just happen to eat uh pizza with like beer and then drank, whatever after. It's like, why did I do that? Oh, because I was stressed by the climate of the politics, right? So you have to look, I read it looks like all the things. And so one of the things that I've been telling some patients is that, with the upcoming holidays here, it's like, oh, I'm gonna be avoiding certain people, or I cut half my family out and I'm no longer friends with these people. And there's such passion on both sides of the fence. You know, each side thinks the other one's stupid, right?
Mhm.
And they both have justifiable reasons for whatever to decide that the other one's stupid for whatever reasons. And yeah, well, both exist simultaneously. And if you're perpetuating the divisiveness, because where we see unity tends to be during catastrophes.
Mhm.
And, some people fly across the country or fly to the other side of the world when some major thing happens. We have Greenpeace, we have, the Red Cross, like, Doctors Without Borders, like, which is a very nice, sort of altruistic and intending practice to really support someone that's not in your own country. And it's like if your neighbor up the street is like struggling, you see them struggling, you're like, hey, can I help you? Like, this is a very nice thing in the 50s and 60s. We lost a lot of that today in some ways. It's very sad. But when something comes down, like an intense hurricane wiping people's houses out, or tornadoes coming through, and people are devastated and homeless and shelterless and foodless, and you know, people rise to the occasion in those moments, like humanity comes through, because that's the essence of the soul. That's knowing that we're no longer in this delusion of separation. The smoke is clear. It's funny
Mm.
when things are smoky, we get clearer, right? And
Sometimes,
knowing,
yes.
yeah, yeah, more often than not. And then
Mhm.
you understand that Thanksgiving's coming up and your uncle might be hardcore Republican and all supporting all this crazy stuff. Okay, well then you can make a decision just not to discuss politics and just connect about other things in the world. Like, you're there to give gratitude for being alive, for the kinship, the connection, because when push comes to shove, people will most likely show up more readily when something catastrophic happens, which unfortunately happens too much these days. But also, it's unfortunate that it requires those kind of things to happen more for us to feel connected, you know?
So, can I pause you for a second? So there's one of the things that you said that really stood out for me was about relationality and the ability to hold contradiction, right? And that Ayurveda, as an ancient wisdom tradition, as an ancient medicine, um, can hold the contradictions of different ideologies, different beliefs, because we're working with what is natural and organic, not what has been created, right, systemically.
Mhm.
So the ideas of racism that were created, the ideas that uphold, colonial control, which try to eradicate Ayurveda as the primary
Mhm.
medicine practice in
Mhm.
India, right, through British colonial control.
Mhm.
These ideas are, or the thinking that um, that these systems, though, that have been created from these ideas don't have real impact is one of the contradictions. Like it's part of the fabric that we're tending to. And so I think you could have a lot of you know um, conflict, right? That we're avoiding, right? If we're sitting at the table, not talking about feeling like, oh, this person actually does not care about my humanity. My body,
Mm-hmm.
however it's shaped, is not perceived as human based on this person's political beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
How can I sit at the table with this person? So this, right, like I could even feel myself like
Yeah.
like my chest was closing. There's stress, there's anxiety, all that I'm suppressing in order to eat. And there's a link, like there's so many families that are saying, actually, I want to create my own traditions. I don't, like, family isn't a requirement. This doesn't require me to come to be with you.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually want to change the generational pattern
Mm-hmm.
and be healthy in my body elsewhere.
Yeah.
I'm choosing this boundary, right, for my generational health.
Mm-hmm.
This is a choice that I'm making based on the political, systemic, human-made conditions,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm sitting with that. I'm also sitting with this, the human-made, the human-created, um, uh, uh, catastrophes. So
Mm-hmm.
even as we're talking about, like, oh, catastrophe can bring us together. This is where we see unity. Um, and if you don't believe the catastrophe is real because
Mm-hmm.
of a political ideology, and I'm thinking about COVID, I'm thinking about pandemic. We've been through this
Mm-hmm.
before, where one political ideology says, this thing isn't real, or this thing isn't as real or as bad as you think it is, or I deserve the right to to move in space with my body as I choose. So I do not want to be masked, and that's a political belief, or I don't even believe this disease exists. I think it's made up by the government in order to
Yeah.
control, right? And so this is where we then come into, um, how does Ayurveda see, this kind of fracturing in relationship, and how do we sit at a table, right? How do we um, uh, come together to start to feel each other across what feels like an existential threat?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, it's a deeply philosophical consideration.
You know I was coming with it.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, of course. And I think um it's like, everybody isn't going to take sides. It's also about cultivating your tools of consciousness and awareness and your interrelationship to things. And so it's like how you see yourself as similar versus dissimilar. Like what are the more important components to connect than disconnect from? And
Yeah.
it's not to say that these other things aren't happening, because they are happening. Of course they are. And it's not to also imply that Ayurveda would not want to support a person honoring their truth that feels like, yeah, I don't want to have dinner with this person. Like, it just doesn't feel aligned. It's not saying, no, you need to do it anyway because otherwise you're not a good person. Like, it tries not to have that level of judgment, this. And a lot of the older texts and concepts and philosophies about how to see clearly. It's like, it's no one group is restricted from consciousness, right? It's in everyone. And to the degree that, like in Bhagavad Gita, um, Arjuna and Krishna, Arjuna is the questioner, and Krishna is the one that knows. He's the knower. He's the representation of God consciousness. He's like, I'm I'm supposed to get into this battle, and across the field are my kin, my family, my friends, my colleagues, and here I am debating, like, how can I get to fight these people because they're my people? And Krishna's like, It's not personal, it's a bigger thing. And your purpose is to be on this battlefield to do your duty, just like it is theirs, you know? So we can take that division, whether it's Republican versus Democrat or black versus white or um, Ukrainian versus Russian, like this duality, in the spiritual texts of yoga, Advaita Vedanta, it's like non-dualism, like to how to not see, you know, this division as like this versus that. It's like, how about this and that can coexist? And it's like how to find that meeting ground. That's why like these great heads of different countries meet at these tables to figure out, how can we make something work? It just seems that it's more ego against ego versus like, well, can we get to the baseline of what's really needed, what's really important here? That's the deeper work, that's the individual process. And maybe we can say, if you are eating all the crappy food and drinking heavily and smoking and doing coke, and you're gonna tarnish the sensory capacity to have access to that truth, of course, that's also true. Like all that's happening
Mhm.
too. If your channels are clogged and arteries are clogged and veins are clogged and your brain is foggy and you have this kind of issue with breathing and this kind of thing with like digesting, uh, you can't have 100% access. I mean, you'll never really have 100% access anyways, I think, because you're still human. The first condition is the human condition. And with human condition, there are many conditions, you know? And so it's like, what is essential to what's relevant in the moment? And how do I deal with that? And how do I feel when I feel this divisiveness in my system? If I'm having this aversion, this extreme of like hatred and anger towards something else, it's like it's different to be passionate. I mean, Jesus was passionate. He got angry when, the tables were outside the temples collecting money, and he's like, screw this, what the hell's wrong with everybody? And he threw. It wasn't like, oh, Jesus had a personality disorder, he suffers from anger, he needs anger management. No, Jesus was very passionate with the conviction of truth, just like Martin Luther King was, just like Mahatma Gandhi was, you know and it's like, it was not, it was personal and it wasn't personal. It's both simultaneously
Mhm.
because they were directly affected by some of the things, but they're also reflecting a bigger picture. And so you can be angry, but it's like how you manage the anger and how it comes out and how it gets discussed and processed. And if there is a relevance to like, yeah, I'm not going to share Thanksgiving with certain people this year because I just don't feel it's okay because I have this. No, of course you want to honor that. You don't want to force the situation, but where is the soft spot? Let's try to connect with the person. And is it really that important? Like these are all your personal questions to determine. Everyone has to determine because the quality of these things will be varied per individual dynamic, right? So it's not
Yes.
like one size fits all, like you do this and that's it. It's sort of like you have the self-inquiry process, you follow um, you follow Alice down the rabbit hole and see where it goes, where it leads you as part of your own evolving process. And you're doing the best that you can with what you have and what you know, because reality is we all are, you know,
Well, I think yes.
like no party, if people want to point fingers at certain, electoral candidates and say one was stupid, and the other was a moron, the other one's this, and the other one's that. It's like, this is just too much messy noise, like,
Mhm.
and um, no one is perfect. So you just try to do the best you can with what you have, and everyone has great capacity to expand. And then there's always going to be that blind spot, like in a car.
You know, this this is helping, I'm sitting with the divisiveness in my body and how I have experienced um, the emotions of fear, like real fear in my body, and the ways in which I have tried to suppress the fear, whether in the past, right? Whether it was through eating, trying to find some kind of dopamine hit, some kind of
Hmm.
soother, drinking wine, like, and
Hmm.
unconsciously doing these things to override the fear because it's
Yeah.
uncomfortable in my body, and especially as I feel it in my gut. Um, and as someone who has like experienced a lot of fear, whether that's through, trauma that is
Hmm.
manifest, right? That as that discomfort, anxiety in my
Hmm.
body over time. Um, I'm very aware. of the sensations of that kind of fear. This and it's different, right? It's like a hyper vigilant, like quick reaction for something that
Mhm.
seems like it is more like it's like I am reacting for something way bigger than the moment, than what's happening in the moment.
Mhm.
As a mother, it is very much this like big fearful energy of what could happen to my child, how will the world perceive my child, what
Mhm.
could, you know.
Mhm.
And so I'm very aware of the fear and the terror in my body. And going into the election, I had this like hypervigilant uh reactive energy that I was
Mhm.
feeling, like probably for at least 3 or 4 months. And at first, I couldn't place exactly what it was. It's affected my sleep, right? Like I have felt like, oh, I know how I am taking care of myself going into this time. But if I'm like really connecting with my body, I am aware
Mhm.
that these sensations have been with me, and I have been trying to do a lot to stay busy to suppress the
Mhm.
anxiety. um and one of the ways I do a lot is, as you know, by like overthinking about things and trying to
Yeah.
do more research and then figuring out how to like share the ideas and get them out there to help other people, because that is part of how I avoid the discomfort of that
Yeah.
anxiety.
Yeah.
So I did my seasonal purge, my seasonal gut purge, the Wednesday before the election.
Mhm.
And you know this. And I think for the people who are listening and watching, this is something that I have now done 3 times.
Mhm.
And so this is a ritual process. It takes several days, leading up to the purge and then post purge. But there's a complete cleansing of my gut, of my digestive system.
Mhm.
And post one of the intentions that I took into the purge was to face and release
Mhm.
this great fear, this like ancient terror that I knew was older than me, going into this election, that I knew was part of my lineage as a Black woman in America, and like
Mhm.
what I was afraid of in the history of America going into this. It wasn't like the last 4 years, it wasn't the last 8 years. Folks are talking about we don't want to
Mhm.
go back. The fear that was in my body was like, I'm not trying to go back 200 years.
Yeah.
Like that was in my body, right?
Yep.
And post that purge, I recognized a steadiness in my gut that I could not name, because I was like, oh wow, like
Mhm.
I'm it's not swirly, it's not like
Mhm.
I am steady. And even going into the election, my brain still wanted to play out a lot of scenarios, but my body, and specifically starting with my gut, my
Mhm.
core, my center, was steady.
Mhm.
Whatever's going on in my microbiome was just like, listen, we're good.
Yeah.
And so when I came to see you, you were like, how are you doing? I was like, yeah, like
Yeah.
it's real up here, but I am steady.
Yeah.
And I know, from my intuition, from my gut, I can see beyond this fear. It's not
Mhm.
overriding the fear. My brain is still trying to play out doom scenarios,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
my body is steady. So I want to just lift that up as a part of the guidance that you were providing and that we're talking about here. Because it was kind of like, well, what can we do? Like coming out of this, where you're like
Yeah.
something hopeful, right? Like what can we control in our microcosm, in our home of the body, in our ecosystem of relationships? What can we do? How can we be um, in a relationship to health in times of that feel like crisis and catastrophe?
Mhm.
And this felt the most potent for me with this purge. Um, and we're facing the same leadership we had the last time we were in a pandemic. So I'm not going to say that I don't foresee some mess. And so I think as I come out of the doom scrolling of the potential future, I want to come back and lift up some of um, the wisdom of Ayurveda that you shared around our relationship to season, to time, the way that we ritualize and honor the time changes.
Mhm.
Um, and purging is one of these activities. You also talked about treating the body as a system, and uh, being able to support or create or co-create environmental health in your locus of
Mhm.
community reach. So I just want to lift those points up again. And if you had any specific points or guidance that you feel like are useful for us as we're walking, as we're moving into this next season, this next political season, this new
Yeah.
season. Yeah.
I mean, so simplistically, I could say, how did we survive? For people that, both sides of the fence will claim the same kind of like horror. Some people like, oh my God, Biden was the worst. Some people are like, Trump was the worst. The people that were against Biden, they had anxiety levels go higher. The people that were against Trump, they had anxiety levels go higher. The ones that were in favor of Trump, theirs came down low. Like, so it's like both sides, if we're looking at sides, but we still went through all of this together, whether it was Biden, whether it was Trump, whether it's whoever, um, day by day, season by season. Like, we all went through each day to the best of our ability in each day. Pandemic happened to fall into the mix and force people to go slower, right? And then out of that came these new opportunities of things of, telehealth and more outdoor dining and, creating a little bit of safety and space and around you. And people paid extra money for filtration systems for the air. And, like community was supporting the local mom and pop kind of store. And then, you had people that was so shut down that they couldn't go to the office anymore. They weren't working at home. They lost their job. They increased their drinking. They increased their marijuana. They increased their drugs. Yeah, both are happening simultaneously. And, to bring in the yoga tradition, Amma, which is a hugging saint from India, I was at this group spiritual gathering a few months ago, and the Swami that stays with her was giving a particular talk, and one of the uh, people in the group asked, "What does Amma think about what's happening? The state of the world and all these bad things?" And he's like, "Yeah, and Amma's an enlightened master. She's an enlightened being. She's a visionary. She has an incredible capacity. She's universal. That's why she's like the divine mother, embodied in a body." And you know, and he said, "Well," she says, "just as those things are happening that seem catastrophic, there are other things on a planet that are also seemingly beautiful and serendipitous and poetic and light and lovely. And, so don't just get stuck in the one side, like catastrophizing, because the polarity is always going to be there.
Mhm.
Darkness and light will always be there. So what you might see is darkness, some other place, some other city, some other town, some other country, some other person's going to be bringing some level of light and or lightness and or like pleasantry. So they're happening. And as extreme as one might be, so is the other extreme. Yeah, it's hard to see the goodness when you're stuck in things that seem bad. But, when we go through the pandemic as an example, it's like some beautiful things came out of it, you know, and we all survived, as much as possible. I mean, people died, and with death comes life, with death comes opportunity, with death comes reflection upon the fragility of our own mortality, to how and how to like interact with each other. And like all of it's happening simultaneously. It just depends on
Mhm.
where you are in your own process and what you're open to, what you're willing to explore. And self-exploration starts with questioning yourself and relationship and following the things that align with the heart and mind and consciousness, that give you positive benefits of well-being and um, sensitivity and connection to one another. So if there's something that you're following and believing that creates an aversion adversity, divisiveness, um, that's the point of like a place of pivoting, and that's the apex of like where there's opportunity. And
Mm.
is it in your karma, right? Is it in your dharma? Because if it's part of your path to be in whatever seems the opposing team, but you're aligned with it, and that's your truth, then that's your truth. That the bigger consciousness knows better than the smaller consciousness. So you might not agree with it, but you can, it's okay to disagree.
It's okay to disagree. This is and I am absolutely um, trusting, right? That message, I keep receiving it. I think spiritually, I keep receiving that, being able to expand my capacity to hold contradiction and
Mhm,
complexity. And I think this is medicine for us all. And I want to name that, just as you described, the fear of death is a big, like, right, that's a driver in my mental and spiritual and physical health. That has been a driver of great dis-ease,
mhm,
and has led me in my life in so many ways, caused me to avoid grief and hold that in my body, hold that stress in my body, hold me in a
mhm,
distrusting relationship with myself.
mhm.
And so I want us to come back to that for next month, because
Yeah.
as we go into more darkness, right? And I'm talking about darkness, I'm talking about the seasonal darkness as we
Mhm,
move into
mhm,
the winter solstice.
mhm,
Um, and but also talking about the polarities, like how we can
mhm,
hold the spectrum of light in our experiences and for our health.
mhm,
And one of the big things that came out with my purge experience that felt like a seasonal um, uh, transformation. It was a
mhm,
transformational moment for me to be with the kind of terror and fear that I've been holding in my body.
mhm,
Um, and that has created new pathways, new neural pathways, new ways of seeing
mhm,
and relating to myself and others that I hadn't had access to before.
mhm,
So I want to celebrate that
mhm.
with you, with us, for us all, and that this is a part of our medicine at this time. It is so essential. So um, I want to thank you, Dr. A, for today and for always. And oh, are we still here?
Yeah, yeah.
Yep, I had my little computer screen. I too much technology. Okay, there we go. I want to thank you for today, and for folks who are interested in working with Dr. A is available on telehealth. So if you don't live in Philly, that's okay. But check Dr. A out at stillpointayurveda.com. Um, Dr. A, is there anything else you want to say as we close out?
Yeah, don't let Thanksgiving be the only day you give thanks for things. Thanksgiving is always now because you don't know tomorrow. And, the mantra for the next 4 years, but should always be, even in spite of 4 years, is we shall see. Be open to the possibility as a curious child to see like what's going to happen. Because then I'll have more information when I know it's available and I know from that place of like curiosity and presence what I need to do in this given moment instead of throw myself into the future without knowing all the details because not everything is revealed. So right now we have everything we need to see and experience. I give gratitude for the fact that there is this body, this vessel that's housing this spirit to progress along in this journey called life that we're all trying to live. All of us,
Ashe.
everyone's trying to live it.
That's right. We're just living. We're just trying to live. Just live has been the message also. And we shall see.
We shall
So
see.
I thank you. I say
Thank
that with hope and
Yes.
delight. We shall see.
Thank you.
You too. All right. I'll see you soon.
See you soon. Bye.